Take two. Welcome to today's episode of Owning Your Menopause. I am so excited for today's guest. She is a highly respected women's health physiotherapist known for her compassionate, practical approach to supporting women through various stages of life, including pregnancy, postpartum, and menopause. She brings a wealth of knowledge on pelvic floor health, physical recovery, and managing symptoms through a holistic lens, which empowers women to take control of their well-being. Through her clinical work, online presence, and speaking engagement, she demystifies pelvic health issues, providing women with the tools and confidence they need to lead healthy, active lives. Her dedication to women's health shines through as she educates, motivates, and supports her clients on their unique journeys. Not only that, she has contributed to the Owning Your Menopause community. She very kindly helped write the pelvic floor section in my book. Clare Bourne, it is so lovely to talk to you today.
Oh, that is a lovely intro. Can you come with me wherever I go and just share that? Because that's a lovely summary. Thank you.
I know, but I don't need to because I feel like you are really out there in this space, making such a positive impact and a positive voice for women with pelvic floor. And I think before we sort of dive into the questions that I've got for you, it might be nice to kind of like touch on how we met, because actually I came to you as a client 3 years ago or 4 years ago, probably longer, unable to sort of go on a trampoline without a need to wee, and I thought that was okay.
Yes, I remember it vividly. And you were like, that's it. And I was like, no, Kate, that's not it. You can have three kids and jump on a trampoline.
Yeah, and I think
And
that
I think
so
that was kind of,
sorry, go.
no, I mean, I just think that was quite a turning point in pelvic health where we were suddenly like, interesting, women probably need to start doing more exercise standing up. It'd been so very much about like lying down and doing your Kegels and all this sort of stuff. And I think there was this real movement of being like, no one else rehabs another muscle lying down the entire journey. And so I remember having learnt how to do standing assessments. I was like, come on, we can do this. And it was a real game changer for so many women.
Yeah, and I think also, like from my point of view as well, it was the fact that I mean, let's go myth busting straight away, and then we'll come on to it. I had three cesareans, so I thought I was immune to any issues with my pelvic floor because absolutely nobody told me about it.
No. Isn't that wild, And I think absolutely right. And it's still a myth we're dealing with now, like I see women in clinic, they're like, well, I don't need to do that because the baby didn't come through there. And it's so logical, right? Because you think, well, the muscles didn't stretch during a cesarean from a pelvic floor perspective. Why would I need to do them? And I think, again, it's really the understanding that these muscles, these pelvic floor muscles, are not only relevant during the perinatal period and for those who have a vaginal birth. You'd never treat any other skeletal muscle in that way to be like, well, this is just for people who like to jump on trampolines, or this is just a muscle that people. No, these are all skeletal muscles that we all need for normal bodily function. And in the same way, you would never go to a personal trainer or train just your hamstrings.
Yeah.
It's a full body thing we need to think about. And so I think what's so confusing is that we don't have the education that pelvic floor muscles are the same makeup as a bicep tricep in the sense of they are skeletal muscle. We think of it as, because it's around our vulva or around the vagina, we think of it as a more an organ based thing, I think, than like just contractile muscle tissue. Once women understand it and they understand that correlation to other area things that they do, they're like, of course, that makes total sense. Like, a baby's been sat on these muscles for 9 months, there's stretch, there's been hormonal changes, there's maybe been constipation. They need help. And I think what's really interesting, Kate, is, and I don't know if this was your experience, but I see a lot of women after one cesarean being like, oh, I was fine. They have maybe another kid, and then maybe by that point they're like, oh, my pelvic floor's maybe not as good as I thought it might have been. And then by the third, they're like, I probably should have done something about this about 7 years ago.
Yeah.
I don't know if that was your sort of
Yeah, I
experience.
totally. And actually, luckily, by the time I had Rupert, there was more of a conversation around that. And I
Mm,
also think, look, I'm not even looking at the questions. I knew this would happen. And I also think maybe like the taboo around it as well, because I know, like you're just saying that, train a bicep. It's very easy for someone to go, train a bicep, do this. But as
yeah.
soon as we sort of talk about vagina or vulva, everyone just kind of like sort of takes a step back and it's like, whoa, are we going there? And actually, find if I went on a run with a friend of mine just now, and I can't remember what I was talking about, but often I talk about things, and I think I said sort of vaginal dryness to him, and he was like, "Oh my god, okay, do we need to run and talk about these sorts of things?" And I was like, "Yes, I think it's really good that
Yes.
we talk about, nobody should be embarrassed about all of that." And I think that
No.
maybe as well has prevented so many women from
Yes.
seeking help and getting help, is that taboo and embarrassment.
100%. And I think it's just deeply ingrained in us, even though I do my job and all I talk about is basically genitals, female, male, pelvic floors. This is just my bread and butter. I talk about that more than any other topic basically in my life. And maybe times tables now, but there's like that's such a huge part. But even when my kids use the correct term for their genitals, I'm like, there's this like inbuilt like, oh gosh, this still feels a little bit uncomfortable, even though
Yeah.
I've brought them up to be like that, and even though I think it's amazing and they are so comfortable to talk about it. I'm like, yeah, come on, but there's still this just bit in me that feels uncomfortable. And I think we all have to examine that part of ourselves, that not to say that's wrong. In essence, we grew up with that, and so that's normal, that's a part of us. But actually just thinking like, I see such a shift, if I'm really honest, and I don't know if you're starting to see that with your older kids. The generations coming through, the shame is just not there in the
Oh,
same way. Even like the
no
20-year-olds
shame.
I now treat, no shame. They're literally, this 120-year-old, I absolutely adore her, love seeing her in clinic. And she's literally like, honestly, I'm on the WhatsApp groups. I'm telling all my friends. I'm telling them, did you know this? Did you know that? And I'm like, wow, like that's, keep going, girl.
Yeah.
And let's just like really shift that, because we can change it for the next generations. I totally am seeing that already. But yeah, I think for us lot and those midlife and beyond, most women I treat postmenopausal would still say, when I go to the proper toilet, which
Yeah.
means a poo, or down there it feels a bit odd. They don't have the anatomical language because they've never been modeled it.
But also, kind of to that point, we still haven't got to the questions. But to that point is, we were taught not to say vagina, vulva, which is where I think a lot of
Yes.
women are confused. Vagina is obviously inside. Philippa K
Yeah.
summed it up for me brilliant the other day.
Internally.
In,
Yeah.
vagina, in. It's got the in word in it, vulva.
Yes.
And I had a wee wee, and I met my friend's daughter had a fairy, and someone had a foo foo, and you're kind of like, we didn't say those words, and we used to have a
No.
vulva, and I thought it was brilliant because Rupert used to call it a vulva. And actually, then I would explain the difference to him.
Mm.
Whereas I know that my parents were, my parents would have been kind of had that like, oh God, what do I say? They've said the word vulva. Oh my God, they've said the word vulva.
Yeah.
It's a wee wee, or it's a foo
Mm.
foo, or it's a fairy, without kind
Yeah.
of So I think we were almost taught to be ashamed of our past. Not everybody. I'm
Yes.
speaking, but it wasn't. It was,
No,
it wasn't. It was a taboo subject. I think now, yes, they throw those words
100%.
everywhere.
Yeah, yeah, you're like, maybe we just remember there's context. I'm like, please don't
Yes,
shout it in the playground, there's
totally.
points. But I think something I've really reflected on as a mum is that, and I kind of hate talking about this, but I also think it's really important, is that I think children knowing their bodies is a real safeguarding thing. And I think it's really sad to say that we should even have to have that in our mindset, but it is a protective thing in essence. And I think when we remember that, like, it's very safe when you know your own body and you know your own boundaries and you know what does work and doesn't work. It's actually an amazing gift to give them in an age appropriate way at the right time. And I think even when that shame bubbles up that's just innately there's nothing, you're not wrong for feeling those feelings, but then just I think it's, for me, it's helped to like reframe that and think, okay, but what am I doing for people going forwards? And I
Yeah.
remember Rupert coming with you to your appointment, and I remember just loving it because I was like, do I just felt it was such an amazing model to him to be like, I mean, he was really little at this point,
Yeah.
but just remembering
Yeah.
you prioritizing your health.
Yeah.
Us, you know, I think a message to mums, we always make it work.
Yeah.
Children don't need to be a barrier to you getting support. And I remember he loved it. He sat watching his iPad. He was having his best time on my desk.
Yeah.
You were behind the curtain. We did the check and he was fine. And
Yeah,
it was
yeah,
great.
and you know what it is, because I think that is the other thing, and you know, I have a daughter who is going to now, you know, she's 15, 16. She needs to understand not to be afraid or ashamed, and that I will go with her to appointments. I will support her with whatever appointments. Like, you know, I think this demographic of women have a real opportunity to kind of support each other and help each other. So I'm now going to come to question number one, and we're going to be here all day.
Brilliant.
Which is, no, can you tell us, anyway, let's go back to the beginning and tell us a little bit about you, Claire, your background, and what inspired you to specialise in, you know, pelvic floor health.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm a physio by training. You know, I went to university to physiotherapy. And actually, when I left uni, my first ever job was in pelvic health. And basically how it works when you leave uni, you don't be like, I want to be this. You go and get experience like doctors do in all areas of physiotherapy, medicine, basically, to work out what you're really interested or what you're particularly good at. And pelvic health, I mean, it was only called women's health then because we didn't really acknowledge that men had a pelvic floor 15 years ago, but we've moved with the times, slash finally moved out of the dark ages, and we now call it pelvic health. But yeah, I just fell in love with it. I thought, Flo, this is amazing. Like, you really do. I've always been someone who dealt with the nitty gritty of life. Like, I just loved those conversations. I was always the friend that was being talked about periods or whatever. So I kind of think I've naturally just kind of been in that sort of space. And I just loved it. I did do other areas just to get enough experience to make sure that I had that kind of like, you need all experiences to really be as good at pelvic health as you can. Like, I've worked on intensive care for years, so I had that very medical background. And all of that sort of feeds into who you become as a clinician. But yeah, basically as soon as I could, I was like heading back. And in that time, I mean, this is over a decade ago now, pelvic health was not cool. And everyone was like, why would you want to do that? Because really loads of physios are like super sporty and they want to go and do rugby physio or whatever. And it's all very trendy and cool. So pelvic health was now like beyond uncool. And I was like, guys, you just wait. Yeah. You've never done it. You can't judge it. It's amazing. And then I just worked my way through the NHS into management. By that point, I'd sort of, for personal reasons, felt it was the right decision for me to move into private practice just for a bit more work-life balance and flexibility. And then I've had 2 kids of my own and sort of just kind of worked around the kids and had my own personal kind of more pelvic health experiences, which have sort of shaped my understanding a bit more and my kind of desire and passion to support women to really know their bodies better. Then I think being a mother, I'm very much now passionate, especially I've got a girl and I've got a boy, seeing it from both their perspectives and how we can support them. And I think then it's just evolved into this, hang on a second, we are not talking about this enough at any age. Yeah. And we need to open up this conversation in every single group, that this is not embarrassing. This is not about dysfunction. This is about well-being and health. And I think that has kind of just led me to just keep pushing boundaries and doors. And I really want to make pelvic health relevant. You know, I think it used to be what physios went into in their 40s, 50s, 60s, end of the career, when you'd had your own kids and you understood. And I was like, no, we have to bring it younger and we have to give it a younger face, because it will only change in the population if we start modelling that it's different. That's my main passion, you know?
Yeah, no, totally. And I think, again, really important, because like you say, this current women and obviously being a menopause podcast, they are very underserved. And I think that they continue to kind of let themselves be overlooked. So I guess, you know, that takes me on, like, how has your understanding of menopause and its impact on pelvic floor health evolved in your own career?
Yes. Oh, fascinating. And I think it's been such a privilege to be in the pelvic health space as the menopause space has just exploded, because, you know, I think it's pushed all of us to think, hang on a second, how are we talking about this? What do we really understand from a pelvic floor perspective? Because I think it used to be like, oh, well, estrogen's going down, your muscles are going to get weak, but what are you going to do? And I think the wider conversation, which I know we're really passionate about, of thinking, how does pelvic health then relate into all areas of women's health, menopause elements? So I think what's really interesting for me is separating pelvic health into kind of 2 key things. So the decline in estrogen has a huge effect on the vulval and vaginal tissues. Now, I think we then automatically think that's the muscles, but really that's actually just changing the more like what we call mucosal tissues. which is the kind of ready tissues of the vagina and the kind of inside of the labia and stuff. These tissues can become very white, what we call atrophic. And because this area of our body has so many more estrogen receptors than, say, your arm, when the estrogen declines, you have noticed this very significantly in that area. And that's why we have these symptoms of vaginal atrophy or genitourinary syndrome of the menopause, where we can start to experience these bladder symptoms, UTIs, pain with intercourse, itching, burning, because of these changes. So I think that's one element that we must consider. The kind of element of, does estrogen directly make your pelvic floor weak, isn't really the link that we think it's there. It's more that it's affecting the tissues, and that can cause symptoms. We also then have, coming alongside it, sarcopenia, which I know you talk about a lot, which is just the general weakening of all of our skeletal muscles. And again, coming back to our conversation before, understanding the pelvic floor is skeletal muscles, you then understand that sarcopenia also hugely affects these muscles, and so they will just weaken. Label that in with constipation, which can be really common with menopause and hormonal changes. You're straining. You can see how these three things together can cause havoc for the pelvic region. So I think that's kind of the way I view it for anyone who is going through that time. And once you break it down, you're like, well, I know what I can do to help with each of those, and there's a lot that we can do. It helps us to think, great, well, there's hope.
Yeah. How can a woman distinguish, like, going through what you've just said and those different symptoms? Obviously you might have all, you might have one, you might have you know, what's normal, like, and what's not normal, like at what point, and again, like, why is this even a question? Because again, I think, at what point do we seek help? Like, I think so many women seek help often, not when it's too late, because it's never too late, but when it's having a bigger impact than it should on their lives. So yeah, I guess what's right, what's not normal, when should they seek help? I'm sort of skipping down the list. So kind of, like number 7, what's normal, what's not?
I mean, I'd say anything that is bothering you is relevant. So if there's been a change, I think what's really tricky, and you've kind of taught, is that a lot of women are entering perimenopause, menopause with symptoms. So they might get worse, and you think, but this is just kind of who I am. So that's where it can be really tricky. But in essence, leaking urine at any point when you don't want to do a wee is not normal. So whether that's in exercise.
What does leaking leaking urine feel like, look like? Because again, I think and funnily enough, like, literally throw myself out there, I remember before I came to see you, and this might be common, I don't know, I would sometimes have a shower or a bath, and then a little while later there might be some kind of leakage. But is that leakage, is that not, like, what it's gone now, so I've obviously dealt with whatever, but like, is that it, what is the leakage like? How do women,
love that question. And I think, how do they determine what it is? So really, urinary incontinence, I would say most people, what it feels like is the sudden release of a warm liquid. And it's very much often correlated with some form of impact exercise or jumping, for example, or when you really are desperate for a wee and you can't make it. Those are the most two common types of incontinence. It's not exclusive to that, but they are the most common. I think what can then sometimes get confused is basically water or discharge also coming out of the vagina, which will sometimes look in the underwear as wet. So, but it definitely is different. So I'm wondering if the bath thing, I don't know about the shower thing, but the bath thing, women can often say, especially after having children. Is that you're in the bath, essentially the vagina is an open space. If everything's a bit more open, a bit more lax, a bit weaker, the laws of physics mean that generally more water is drawn in, and then as you become up, there's gravity, out it will dribble. And different times of our lives, we may have more discharge. If we're still ovulating, we might have more discharge, and so we might start to feel this, oh, hang on, there's something like warm and wet in my underwear. But generally the passage of discharge we don't feel as a sudden like whoop. Whereas urine is, and it's often much more activity dependent. So I say, and if you're not sure, the best way that we would often say is put a little pad in, and then look, urine is often incredibly yellow. Discharge, generally speaking, shouldn't be a very yellowy colour, and they also smell different. So I know that's not nice to talk about, but it can help you differentiate what the difference is.
Yeah, but it's important to talk about, you know, because I do think, and
Yeah.
I've gone on lots of runs with friends who have had to stop, they've had to do whatever, you know, and they've been incredibly embarrassed about that. And it's, luckily it's with me because I'm always like, well,
Yeah.
not, you know, don't be embarrassed. And I've had friends that they've had to stop and go to the loo, and all of this. So
Yeah.
you know, I guess prevention is better than like cure in that particular spot. So like you're saying, yes, many women come into perimenopause and they aren't aware of those issues, and then it escalates throughout. Now, why does it get worse? I guess you've talked on the hormones,
Yeah.
but yeah, let's go there again a little bit more.
Yeah, so I'd say it's a double whammy. So it's definitely the hormone element. So basically, any time with that estrogen going down and the thinning of the tissue, so particularly for like urinary symptoms, um, it thins the tissues of the urethra as well, which is the tube that brings wee out of your bladder. So any weakness there, and it gets down to the complexities of why do we experience incontinence, and there's kind of two key mechanisms. But if your urethral sphincter, which is the ring of muscle around your urethra, which essentially holds wee in and relaxes when you want to do a wee, if that's already weaker, maybe you were relying a bit more on the tissues being a bit plumper, but they're also not plump anymore. And then you've also got sarcopenia where everything's just getting weaker. You have this just like double effect of making symptoms worse. I think depending on what your symptoms are that have worsened, the mechanism of why will be different. But I'd say for most people, it's that the hormonal means that those tissues are just not as plump in the way that I'm sure you notice in other parts of your body, your skin, your tissues, that there's differences, there's changes that occur with estrogen going down, and it's just very heightened in the vagina and vulva. When everything's less plump and it's dry, everything is less supported when those muscles are weaker. And let's face it, most of us probably going into perimenopause have maybe done exercise, maybe our legs are not as weak. But if we've not actually done any focused pelvic floor rehab, we're probably going in with a very weak pelvic floor, or maybe not an optimal functioning pelvic floor. And therefore, we're going in on sort of the back foot, and then the hormones kick in. But I think what's important to know is that we can supplement estrogen in the vagina
Yeah.
really well. And that can be an amazing solution for some women for certain, especially recurrent UTIs, some for urgency, especially with pain with intercourse. It's not the full story. You still have to do the rehab, but it's just we need to understand the separation of the two issues so that we can then treat them both effectively. Just doing pelvic floor exercises is probably not enough. I don't think that's the solution to any problem, really. Is you need to understand the whole of pelvic health. And I always say, look, if you're doing a pelvic floor exercises and you're taking vaginal estrogen, but you're constipated and you're straining every day, multiple times, there's no point. You know, you have to deal with all elements for you to feel stronger again.
Yeah, that leads me on very nicely. Like, are there any particular like lifestyle changes and habits that people can positively, you know, that can positively impact their pelvic health? Because, like you've just sort of said, it's not just
Yeah.
this or that. Like, are there the
Yeah.
external factors as well that can help?
Yeah, and what I love about it is they're all so intertwined. So, you know, you end up doing one thing and that really helps three things. So
Yeah,
that's what's really helpful about it. I think when we talk about lifestyle and menopause, actually, if you go for the foundations, they're probably going to help with all elements of your health. But if you very much think about pelvic from a gut perspective, as I say, constipation is such a tricky one for so many women. And I think we don't talk about bowels. We don't even know what's normal, what's not normal. But in essence, if you are struggling to pass a stool, if that means you're straining, if you feel you can't go for a few days, um, we want to get that better. So the main things that will help our bowel are making sure we're drinking enough fluid, not just teas and coffees, but water, hydration. There she goes, drinking her water. I need to drink some more as well
yeah,
today. That's really, really key. Thinking that 1.5 to 2 litres of fluid. Fibre. I mean, look, we're all being encouraged to introduce more plants. There are so many benefits from that. But if you just look from a pooing point of view, fibre is basically what allows us to pass the stool more easily. There are two different types. There's insoluble and soluble. We want to have a bit of both. And we're generally advised to have about 30 grams of fibre, which, to be honest with you say that to me, I couldn't tell you initially what that's like. And I think sometimes we can hear all these numbers and you just think, oh, that's so overwhelming. But what I just say to women is, look, why not think about 3 things of fibre that you can add in a day, whether that's some flaxseed on your cereal that you're already eating, whether that's some seeds on top of some avocado that you're already having, whether that's one more vegetable or a piece of like a pear after your dinner. This doesn't have to be overwhelming. We can make it really practical. And I think that's what I generally get women to think about, rather than like numbers that they're like, well, I can't aim for that because I don't know what that means. And movement, I don't need to convert your listeners probably to that, but our gut loves it when we move, walking, being active, all of it helps. And if we can think about that trilogy, it makes a big difference. And if we can sort our gut out. So I think gut health, as we know, I mean, it's exploding in the world of kind of understanding. And I think when we hear gut health, we think, oh, microbiome.
Yeah.
Yes, really important. But actually just the functional working of your gut. Great to have a wonderful, diverse microbiome, but if it doesn't work and move, that's also a serious problem. So, and I think not understanding your pelvic floor is actually responsible for letting the poos out. So it's got to chill. It's got to let go.
I was going to say as well, like I think when we talk about pelvic floor, again, we're literally, we're thinking about the pelvic floor area, vagina, vulva, that area. We're not thinking about our bowels. And again, it's another taboo topic, isn't it? When we talk about poo, everyone goes, oh god, we're talking about poo, gut health.
Here she goes again.
Yeah, there she goes again. I have been told a really good word, 2 kiwis a day is really good at.
Love a kiwi.
Yeah, kiwis are really good. As one of the nutritionists I work with is always like, if whenever you've got constipation, 2 kiwis can be really, really helpful. But I think again, that is, again, I think the gut changes that we see when we go through menopause, have a significant impact, and like you're saying, obviously then do affect our pelvic floors. Can you explain? And I guess we've gone into that, but I mean, let's go a little bit deeper with it. How the sort of the stress and the mental impact and influence pelvic health has on women, especially through menopause.
Oh gosh, we know that there's a link, and it makes sense, right? These are really important parts of our lives. If you're feeling you can't maybe exercise the way you want to, which really helps with your mental health because you're leaking and you're embarrassed, that's incredibly stressful. And it's different to saying, oh, sorry, I can't come for a run, I've got an ankle injury. It's really hard for people to say to people like, really sorry, but I wet myself. Like, that's really stressful. If it's affecting your relationship, because maybe intercourse isn't as possible, or it's really painful, and maybe someone's told you it's in your head and you just need to chill, and all these sort of things. Like, these are emotionally really hard. And really, anyone who's experiencing bladder or bowel symptoms, we know that there is a mental health and psychological element. So it's really, really important that we address the kind of underlying symptoms. I mean, yes, we know there's other reasons when hormones change, as we know, the brain fog, the emotional element of that, hugely important from a hormonal perspective. But again, I think this is where we have to be holistic, because it's very easy to go to a GP and saying, oh, I'm struggling with my mental health, or I'm feeling quite teary, or I'm feeling depressed, or I'm much more anxious. And we can give you medication, of course, and that's a vital part of it. But I think what we always have to say to women, well, let's just really try and understand where this is coming from. And I'd say for a lot of women, if you're feeling almost stressed every time you get out of the house because you don't know where the next toilet is, or if you're feeling like, oh, I can't go to the toilet before I take the kids out, or whatever it might be, that's stressful. And even if it's not a stress that you're necessarily aware of, it's definitely an underlying stress. And so for me, I'm really passionate that we give women empowerment back over their bodies so they can go on an aeroplane and feel confident. Or, I work with loads of amazing postmenopausal women, and they're like, I just want to go on that coach holiday with my friends. I'm like, great, let's have that as your goal, and they come back and they're like, I did it and I wasn't anxious. And, I just think it's really important that that's a really valid point of life. Like, I think we can sometimes be like, oh, well, that's a privilege to be able to do that. And I think it's a basic human right to be able to leave your house and feel confident. Yeah. So, yeah, I've sort of gone off there. But yeah, no, it's really, really significant link and very important.
I'm going to ask a question again now, bring it back to myself. I've noticed, here we are, we're going to get a free session out of Claire quickly. I have noticed that at night time I am going to the loo a little bit more often, and sometimes, like before bed, you empty your bladder, and I'll empty my bladder, and then I'll go down and do something, and I'll think, oh, I'll just have a final wee, because there feels like the need to do a wee, but maybe there's not much. What does that tell you?
Yes.
What should I do?
Yeah, I mean, so Yeah, what do I
What
do?
can I do?
So, I mean, nocturia, as we call it,
Yeah.
nocturia is going for a wee overnight time, so waking up from sleep. And that is one of the symptoms of genitourinary syndrome of the menopause, is
Okay.
we might start to see that happening more. I'd say a lot of bedtime weeing is behavioural and it's anxiety driven because maybe we're worried about getting up overnight. So we think, well, if
Yes,
I
I
get
am. I
all the
don't want to
wee
wake
out,
up. Yeah, I want to get everything
there
out.
you go. You
So
get
because I do get up and wee in the
everything out.
night. I do get up and wee in the night, probably
Yes.
twice a night.
Interesting. But the thing is, it's look, it's human to do that because there's a logical sense in that. But the irony often being is that more we drive the bladder to go at smaller volumes, the more you're probably going to go at smaller volumes, which is probably going to make you go more.
Yeah.
So actually, being quite obviously, coming back to that sort of specific example, thinking about what you're drinking before, because sometimes that's a terrible, aren't we, where we haven't drunk for most of the afternoon, we get home, have dinner, and we're necking 3 glasses of water. Now, if you're filtrating that amount of fluid, you're probably going to need to pee quite a few times in the evening. So just thinking about your whole fluid intake in the day can help with that. But sometimes, if I'm honest, it's stopping that extra wee and that behavior for 3 nights in a row. It will probably go because so in reality, our bladder has the ability generally to hold between, most people weigh 350 mils up to sort of 500, sometimes 600 mils. So often your first wee of the morning will be huge if you haven't gone loads overnight.
Wow.
So we have this amazing,
Quite
we
a
have this
wee.
capacity to hold a good amount of urine. And when we start going these small wees like 50 mils, the bladder's like, oh, yeah, okay, fine, I'll do it. Because basically, the bladder is a muscle itself. It's not the same as your skeletal muscles, it's smooth muscle, but it's triggered to contract when your urethral sphincter lets go. So when you go to the toilet, so that's the learned behavior that we learn as children, is we let go and that triggers that contraction. So you will be able to go if there's even a small amount there. But the more you do that, the bladder is incredibly behavioral, the more it will do that. So that's what we sometimes work with women who've got into sort of, we'd say, maybe diagnosed as having an overactive bladder. They're going, 20, 30 times a day, multiple times a night. There's lots of things that we look at, but sometimes it's just these small things that have shifted in and we start to change small behaviors and that transforms a woman's sleep and as women's experiences. So I think for you, it's understanding, why am I doing this? Sometimes
Yeah.
being really strict with yourself to be like, listen, it just went 5 minutes ago. I really can't need to go again. Now the feeling is real. That's where it's weird because you'll get these sensory like, oh,
Yeah.
hello, I could really do with going. So it's not saying you're wrong in feeling that, but it's just saying what's driving that and can I in any way distract myself, do something different and then try and avoid it.
Yeah. I like that. It's quite funny because I'm sitting here laughing because I'm like one end or the other, and actually so is my son because I have read it that people with ADHD are often so preoccupied I'll be with Rupert, well, but they forget. So we'll be in a car, and literally Rupert's like, I need a wee. I'm desperate. I need a wee. And like he's been totally fine. And sometimes you need a wee. It's like I need a wee. And then you could, and most of my kids, I'll be like, okay, well the petrol station is just 25 minutes, and we'll wait.
Yeah.
And apparently one of the symptoms of ADHD is like your brain has been doing whatever. And then it's that sudden urgency, like I need the loo and I need now. So actually, Rupert, I'm sorry you're only 8, but I'll share the story now. We do carry bottles in the car with us because sometimes that urgency is we cannot stop. And because he's a boy, he's very lucky.
There's no
He can
option.
pee in a bottle. So I can't. So I need
It's
to
a dream.
remember. So just moving forward, obviously, for any woman that has been listening to this that is experiencing any issues, how do they get started with physiotherapy? And what would they expect from an assessment session?
Yeah, so I think what's really important is if you've got symptoms of incontinence or overactive bladder or fecal incontinence or chronic constipation, you're struggling, or pain with intercourse, like there is support on the NHS if you're based in the UK. Obviously, around the world, every healthcare system is different, but there is support. Now, as we're fully aware with most things in the NHS at the minute, there's generally long waiting lists and we can't always guarantee the support that you will get. But it is important that women hear that this is not just a privilege to get support for, because it's not. There is support. I worked in the NHS for years and I know that there is a lot of help. Obviously, a lot of women are just get to that desperate point of like, it's fine, I'll pay for a few sessions because actually I can go and see someone now. Wherever context you see somebody, whatever context you see someone, generally speaking, you will be someone like me, and we will have a lovely chat first. We want to, a bit like how we're chatting now, we want to understand more about you. I want to hear from you what you're worried about. I'm going to ask you some questions, because there's sometimes things that you haven't even noticed in yourself that maybe is happening, and that's really helpful for me to start joining the dots for you. And a lot of the work I end up doing in clinic is like, well, have you actually realised that there's this going on and this going on and this going on, and they're probably all slightly related, and we've maybe not connected them, and people are like, hang on a second, or oh, I've done that since I was a kid, or actually I've done that since I've had kids. There's so many connections that we sometimes make for women. And then we'll do an examination. So again, always conversation with you, always with your consent. But generally how I work is I would always look at how someone's breathing. I'll do an assessment of their abdomen as well, because all the abdominal area and muscles are all related, and how we breathe. And then we would do a vaginal examination to assess your pelvic floor. If you've got bowel symptoms, I might suggest that we do an examination of your anus and the back passage as well, because as we say, lots of muscles around there too. And for example, for UK, we did a standing assessment as well, because you were really struggling when you were upright, and your symptoms were very much when you were jumping and when you were functional. So I was wanting to understand, well, how's your pelvic floor functioning in these positions, because it might be totally different to when you're lying down. So that may not all happen in one session, but those are the sort of things that we're wanting to do. And we totally understand. Look, no one is like, yes, vaginal examination, really what I want. But I think once you get to know us a bit better and we talk you through it feels a little bit less scary. But there's no pressure from us. We can always try and work around things. What I say to them is, don't let that be a barrier to you getting support, because bring all your worries and your concerns, bring your lists. I love a list of questions, and just put it on the table, and we'll work it out with you. Because I think the worst thing is that you don't come because there's a fear of one part of it. We're never going to force you to do something you don't want to do, and there are other ways that we'll work around it with you if we need to. But sometimes women are like, oh, I really didn't want to, but actually that wasn't as bad as I feared.
Yeah, and it's so important, because whether it is the vaginal examination for pelvic floor health, whether it's a smear, whether it's a mammogram, whether it's, we mustn't be afraid of like allowing people to help us in those moments. It's so much better to get the help than to sort of put off the help. For women experiencing painful intercourse, what are some of the ways that obviously the physiotherapy might help them, and what if they're not quite ready for physio, or they're a bit scared, what are some of the products that might help them? Do you recommend any particular brands, any particular ways? Yeah, I guess of just sort of addressing that.
Absolutely. I think people are like, how does a physio help with intercourse? Great question. Not at all. You naturally connect. But essentially your pelvic floor muscles will allow penetration. They have to relax to allow penetration. And if you've got pain because of skin conditions, the muscles can get very tight and protective. So we're not just working with your muscles, but we're also looking at the tissues and how everything's functioning as well. But yeah, it's a huge part of what I do now, actually, is sort of sexual health and pelvic health within that. But yes, if you're not ready for physio, if you are perimenopausal, postmenopausal, you're noticing things feel drier, more uncomfortable, a vaginal moisturizer, I often recommend Yes Organics. I really like their products. There's a vaginal moisturizer. You can, like, you moisturize your face. It's a particular one that's designed to be fine for the vagina. You can put it in the evenings. That can make a big difference. You might want to speak to your GP and see if you're someone who could take some vaginal estrogen. We have research studies that show we are not utilizing vaginal estrogen enough. Really, there are very, very few women who should absolutely never take it. And really what you need is a specialist GP who understands all the elements of menopause and can talk. But really, vaginal estrogen is like an absolute one drug, and I don't think I'd even call it a drug, a product. And we should definitely be using that more. So I really, really recommend that. I think for... Yeah, go on.
And the vaginal estrogen, can that help with incontinence problems and sexual health issues? Does it treat the
generally
whole
a whole
area?
host of things?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, because basically when you put estrogen into the vagina, it also, because the urethra is by the front wall and your bowel's by the back wall, all of those tissues, we often see there's improvement, and sometimes they might give you an estrogen cream to put on the vulva itself, because I think we never understand that your vulval skin is the same as like the other skin in your body. You can get vulval eczema, you can get vulval psoriasis. If it's estrogen deficient, it can get very splitty, and it can almost be like paper cuts, which is agony,
Yeah.
and you can't see this. So you're just saying it doesn't feel right, but you can't like bend your neck. You're not, you're not a giraffe. You can't see the area. So you really rely on other people assessing you and having a look. But looking after the skin of the vulva, so sometimes using an oil on the outside, like an vulval oil. I know one that's particularly loved by menopausal women is the one by the brand Nadea. It's
Yeah.
like in a lovely purple bottle and it has a little pipette and you can put it on the outside. So, we can like double up, have an oil on the outside, have a moisturizer on the inside, like look after that area in the same way that you're slapping on retinol probably and like anti-aging creams to your face and buffing and all these other things we do for the rest of our body. And our vulva, we're like, well, I'm sure it'll be fine.
Yeah.
Look after that area of our bodies. It's going to struggle more than other parts because of the way it's made and has so many estrogen receptors. We have to take care of it. So depending on who you are, what stage you're at, there is options for everyone, and that conversation needs to be louder, 100%.
Yeah. I've got so many more questions. I'm going to have to ask a couple more. So we talked about obviously vaginal atrophy. I went to an event the other day, and I'm not showing my lack of ignorance here. I'm showing, just things that I don't know. It was a great event. I walked away with a vibrator. I walked away with something else. I can't remember what, but I had to tell Rupert it was an ear cleaner because he was desperate to get it out of the box. And then dilators. So they literally looked like they look like big needles. And actually I've been talking to a pelvic floor person on Tuesday, and I was saying, and they said, no, that's not for someone who has got weak pelvic floors. It's some women can be too tight. And so it's about switch. Yeah, it's the opposite problem.
Yeah, absolutely. So they're called vaginal dilators, but I often say to women in clinic, look, your vagina can dilate, right?
Yeah.
The vaginal walls are like an accordion. They're like wrinkly. They're called rugae, and they're designed to stretch. Phenomenal. Really what the dilators are aiming to do. So, for example, if you have had repeated painful intercourse or repeated painful smears or use of tampons or anything that needs to go into maybe vaginal ultrasounds, things like that, if it is painful, your body is always aiming to get us out of pain. And so the way that often muscles do is they go into protection mode. So as I was saying, they kind of contract and they become very protective. I describe the pelvic floor a bit like a bodyguard. They're there to basically be like, that's not okay. Let's stop that. Then what can happen is a bit like this learnt behavior we've talked about with the bladder. The pelvic floor just goes to any form of penetration. It's like, whoa, it's going to be painful. I'm going to be tight. Over time, and again, there's complexities as to why someone might present like this more than someone else, but it's actually a conversation that we have around tone of a muscle. So it's not that you're so tight that this muscle can't relax. It's that it's got into a pattern of holding. So a bit that you might associate with your shoulders getting a bit tight or your jaw clenching or things like that. It's increased tone. It's everything's a bit more on. And your pelvic floor can do the same. So what I would use dilators with in clinic, so you're absolutely right. They're like very thin, going up in sizes, generally from the size of a finger all the way up to sort of life-size penis size. And you gradually put these into the vagina over time, maybe weeks, maybe months, to allow you to have positive experience of penetration that is not painful. And we use this with breathing techniques. We make sure your skin is optimized. We make sure there's no splits, because ultimately there's no point of putting things in if they're still causing pain. The idea is we need to understand why you've got pain, deal with this, talk about all the options, and then use dilators to help retrain the muscular response that has occurred because you've had pain. Does that make sense? So that's what the dilators are aiming to do, and they are amazing when used correctly. Amazing.
That makes sense. It's in my gift box because I don't need that, so I'm hoping I don't gift it to the wrong person. If you could find someone a good home for it, maybe I'll send it to you, give it to you next time I see you. Might
Please
be
do.
nice for someone in
Amazing.
your clinic to have it, or you could do a giveaway.
Yeah, thank you.
Or maybe we could do a joint giveaway, she says. Right, my last question. What are your top tips for women looking to maintain pelvic health through and beyond menopause?
Love that. So, get to know your pelvic floor, and I do recommend pelvic floor exercises. That doesn't just mean Kegels, squeezing here and there. It's really understanding how to exercise your pelvic floor. Get your book, read the pelvic floor section, get my book, understand more about pelvic health. You don't have to spend £100. Our books are like 10 quid on Amazon. Just really read those sections, embrace it, and understand that part of your body. It is life changing. And I know that sounds biased, but I know it is because I see it in clinics. So really understand these muscles for what they are and what they do, and just start exercising them. It's amazing. When they start working, it's exciting. Sort your bowels out. And if you're struggling and you've done everything that Kate and I have said today and you're still struggling, please speak to a doctor. We talk about poo all the time, and we're not worried when you talk to us about your poo. It's absolutely fine. And what I haven't talked about, which I'm really passionate about, and I can't believe I've done an entire podcast and I've not talked about this yet with you, is bone density.
Yeah.
Bone density. We've, as physios, bone and muscle health is absolutely vital. The link with pelvic health is that we know as we age, women who are incontinent and are rushing to the toilet are much more likely to have a hip fracture, and that the link between hip fractures and mortality is really strong, and that's really sad. So what I always say to women is, like, we're not just investing in this now so you can go on a trampoline. We're investing in the 80-year-old self who needs strong bones, needs a good pelvic floor so she's not running to the toilet. And we're not increasing, and having a grandmother who had that twice, hip fractures, and seeing her go from that, I wish that for no one. But as women, bone density and bone health is not on our side. We have to work hard at this, and we have to work on it earlier as possible. It's never too late, but the earlier we take it. And so if your pelvic floor is stopping you doing Kate's program, if it is stopping you doing lifting weights or running or jumping or whatever it is, please get help for that, because I'd never want your pelvic floor to be a barrier to later life when you need to get off that toilet or when you need to not fracture a hip.
Yeah, and that, I think, it's funny, isn't it? Because I think all of these things, they are so intrinsically linked together. And I think,
Yes.
as women, as whatever, everyone tries to break bits down. And we shouldn't. Like, this life stage is the whole thing. It's your whole body. Yeah. And, as we've talked about, the muscles, the bones, the gut, the brain, the mental part of it. Like, it's the whole thing. Thank you. As predicted, we've totally cracked out a lovely, wonderful, long episode. But how is it not possible to do so? Because we need to get women this information. Claire, where can people find you if they want to book an appointment, if they want to follow you? Where can they get your books?
Amazing. So my website is my name, clare-bourne.com. It has all like clinic information. I've also got an amazing team as well if anyone needs like support in not my area. Instagram, I love to talk about stuff. I'm trying to do a lot about menopause this month, so Clare Bourne Physio is my Instagram handle. And then generally a book, you can get it in Waterstones on Amazon. It's called Strong Foundations, Why Pelvic Health Matters, and it literally goes from childhood all the way through to menopause. There is literally something in it for everyone. And you might think, well, why do I need to think about my childhood? It's because we've come from there. So understanding your own journey is vital when you're looking at your life right now.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your time. I know you are very busy this month. So thanks for squeezing us in. I'm fine. I'm glad we got around to it. And I hope to see you in real life very soon.
Me too. Thanks for having me.